The day my daughter-in-law Shirley called me, just an old grandma who needs to stay in her lane at Thanksgiving dinner, everyone at the table froze. I didn't say a word. I just swallowed the insult with a sip of wine and continued passing the mashed potatoes. No one, especially not Shirley, had any idea that I owned the beautiful colonial house they were living in, the very table we were eating at, or that the mortgage they thought they were paying was actually going straight into my bank account. My son Michael had always been the apple of my eye. I raised him alone after my husband David passed away unexpectedly when Michael was just 11. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 25 years, I worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, and built a modest real estate portfolio to ensure Michael would have opportunities I never had. The crown jewel was the historic Colonial on Maple Street, my dream home that I purchased as an investment property 10 years ago. When Michael married Shirley 3 years ago, I offered them the house at what they thought was a generous discount. From a family friend. They never questioned why the monthly payments were so affordable for such a prestigious neighborhood, or why the mysterious owner, listed only as Westfield Properties LLC, was so accommodating about repairs and upgrades. Michael assumed it was because of his excellent credit score and Shirley's family connections. The truth was much simpler. A mother's love. I kept up the arrangement because I wanted them to feel independent. Michael had always been sensitive about accepting help, and Shirley came from a wealthy family who made it clear they thought Michael wasn't quite good enough for their daughter. The last thing I wanted was to undermine my son's confidence or his standing with his in-laws. So I played my part, the modest, middle-class widow who lived in the small ranch house across town, who babied her granddaughters perhaps too much, who couldn't possibly understand the sophisticated world Shirley navigated with her interior design business, catering to the town's elite. I visited once a week for Sunday dinner and occasionally watched my granddaughters, 7-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Lily. I brought homemade cookies that Shirley discreetly threw away, claiming they contained too much sugar. I kept my mouth shut when Shirley redecorated the house, painting over the heritage colors I had carefully researched and selected, replacing the period-appropriate fixtures with modern alternatives that made the Historical Society members wince when they drove by. "Mother knows best," Michael would say apologetically whenever I noticed another change, a nervous smile indicating he was caught between pleasing his wife and respecting my obvious expertise in historical homes. "It's your house," I would reply with a smile. "You should make it how you want it." If only they knew. The tension had been building for months. Shirley's comments about my clothes, so practical, my car, reliable, perfect for someone your age, and my cooking, traditional, though we're trying to eat clean, had become increasingly patronizing. Michael noticed but said nothing, his conflict-avoidant nature, something he inherited from his father, preventing him from addressing the growing disrespect. But Thanksgiving was different. Shirley's parents, Rose and Walter, were visiting from Florida. Rose had always treated me with a cold politeness that barely masked her disdain for my middle-class background. Walter was kinder, but followed his wife's lead in all social matters. They had arrived with expensive gifts for the girls and subtle criticisms about everything from the turkey, a bit dry, to the neighborhood, quaint, though not quite what we would have chosen. I had spent 3 days helping Michael prepare for their visit, cleaning the house while he worked late, preparing side dishes that complemented Shirley's elaborate menu, even finding and repairing an antique high chair, so little Lily could sit at the grown-up table. Shirley had acknowledged none of this, instead stressing about whether the table settings would impress her mother. The breaking point came during dessert. Emma had asked me to tell the story of how her grandfather and I had met at a harvest festival, 40 years ago. It was her favorite family tale, full of romantic details that delighted her young heart. I was midway through the story when Shirley interrupted. "Emma, Why don't you show Grandma Rose the drawing you made at school? I'm sure Grandma Sherry has told that story enough times that we all have it memorized by now. But I like the way Grandma Sherry tells it, Emma protested. She makes it sound like a fairy tale. Well, fairy tales are for children, Rose interjected with a thin smile. And your Grandma Rose has much more exciting stories about our travels through Europe last summer. Real adventures, not small-town romances. I felt the familiar sting, but kept my expression neutral for Emma's sake. I'd love to see your drawing, sweetheart. See? Shirley said to Emma. Grandma Sherry knows when to step back. That's what grandmothers do. They support without taking over. Unlike some mothers-in-law, Rose added with a meaningful glance at her daughter. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom's stories are family history, Shirley. The girls should know where they come from. They come from both sides of the family, Shirley replied tersely. And frankly, your mother's quaint little life stories aren't exactly the legacy I want for our girls. They should be hearing about achievement, culture, sophistication. My mom achieved plenty, Michael said, a rare note of defensiveness in his voice. She raised me alone and, yes, we've all heard it, Shirley cut him off with a dismissive wave. Single mother, worked her fingers to the bone, sacrificed everything. It's very admirable. But there's more to success than just surviving, Michael. The table fell silent. Even Rose seemed to sense Shirley had gone too far. I just think, Shirley continued, her voice taking on a placating tone that somehow made everything worse, that the girls should be exposed to a broader worldview than just small-town America. They should know there's more to aspire to than just being an old grandma who bakes cookies and tells the same stories over and over. Surely, Michael warned, his face flushing. What? I'm not saying anything bad, Shirley protested. Sherry knows I respect her for her traditional values. But she's just an old grandma who needs to stay in her lane. The world has changed. And the girls are growing up in our world, not hers. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked confused, while Lily, oblivious to the tension, continued smashing her pie into colorful patterns on her plate. Rose wore a satisfied smirk, while Walter studied his napkin with sudden interest. Michael stared at his wife in shocked dismay, and I sat there, the owner of the very house we were dining in, the holder of the mortgage they thought they were paying to a faceless corporation, the woman who could, with one phone call, change their entire living situation. More coffee, anyone? I asked instead, rising to retrieve the pot from the kitchen. As I stood at the counter, hands slightly shaking as I poured the dark liquid into my cup, I made a decision. After 3 years of silence, after countless small humiliations and dismissals, after watching my son become increasingly cowed by his wife's dominant personality, it was time for a change. Not a confrontation. I had never been one for dramatic scenes, but a quiet, dignified reclamation of my power and position, a reminder to my son and a revelation to my daughter-in-law about exactly who I was and what I had built. They had no idea what was coming, but by Christmas they would. I returned to the dining room with fresh coffee and a practiced smile, the kind I'd perfected over years of keeping my thoughts to myself. Michael shot me an apologetic glance as I refilled his cup. Mom, I'm sorry. About, he began in a low voice. It's fine, I interrupted gently. Let's just enjoy dessert. But it wasn't fine. As I sat there listening to Rose dominate the conversation with stories about their Mediterranean cruise, I felt something hardening inside me. I had endured Shirley's dismissive attitude for 3 years, watching as she gradually isolated Michael from his old friends, redecorated the house I had lovingly restored, and treated me with increasing condescension. The Amalfi Coast is simply divine in the off-season, Rose was saying, gesturing with her dessert fork. The locals actually have time for you then. Walter, remember that charming little restaurant in Positano? The owner treated us like family. He certainly did. Walter agreed amiably, though I noticed his eyes darting occasionally to the football game visible on the TV in the adjacent room. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We should take the girls there someday, Shirley said. Emma would love the history, and the Mediterranean diet would be so good for them. Much better than all that processed American food, Rose added with a meaningful glance at the homemade apple pie I'd brought. Did you know, Sherry, that Europeans have much lower rates of obesity? It's all about fresh ingredients and proper portion control. I smiled and nodded, as if receiving valuable wisdom. The pie is actually made with local organic apples and honey instead of refined sugar, I said mildly. From the farmer's market. Oh, how rustic, Rose replied, her tone suggesting this was barely an improvement. Shirley jumped in quickly. Mom has the most amazing contacts in Florence who ship her authentic Italian olive oil. I've been using it in all our cooking. Maybe I could send you home with a bottle, Sherry? It might elevate your recipes. The implication that my cooking needed elevating hung in the air. I thought of the meals I'd prepared for Michael throughout his childhood, the comfort food that had sustained him through his father's death, the family recipes passed down through generations that he had once loved. That's very thoughtful, Shirley, I said, accepting the implied criticism with outward grace. The evening finally ended. As I gathered my coat, Shirley approached with a thin smile. Sherry, before you go, I wanted to ask if you could watch the girls next weekend. We've been invited to the Harvey's holiday party. They're very influential in my industry, and our regular sitter is unavailable. The request was delivered as if she were bestowing a favor upon me, allowing me access to my own granddaughters. Course, I agreed. I'd love to spend time with the girls. Wonderful. We'll be leaving around 6. Oh, and please don't bring any sweets or junk food. We're trying to teach them healthy eating habits. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. And if you could make sure Emma practices her piano for at least 30 minutes, that would be helpful. Her recital is coming up, and she's been slacking off. Also, Lily has a new bedtime routine we're implementing. I'll email you the steps. It's very specific. I'm sure I can manage, I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the implication that I couldn't handle basic childcare. Perfect. And if you wouldn't mind tidying up before we get home? Last time the girls left quite a mess, and you know how I feel about waking up to disorder. Each request was delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, each one underscored by the unspoken message, you are here to serve, not to be family. As Michael walked me to my car, he finally found his voice. Mom, I want to apologize for Shirley. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. Didn't she? I asked quietly. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. A gesture so like his father, it made my heart ache. She's just stressed with the holidays. And her parents visiting. You know how her mother can be. I do, I acknowledged. And I know that doesn't excuse how she spoke to me. No, it doesn't, he admitted. I'll talk to her. But we both knew he wouldn't. Or if he did, it would make little difference. The pattern was too well established. Shirley would say something hurtful. Michael would apologize on her behalf, and nothing would change. Remember when you were 16 and that boy made fun of your secondhand clothes? I asked suddenly. Michael looked surprised by the change of subject. Randy Phillips? Yeah, that jerk made my sophomore year miserable. You came home so upset. Said you were never going back to school, I recalled. And I told you that you had 2 choices. Let him define your worth, or show him that his opinion didn't matter. And I joined the debate team to prove I was smarter than him, Michael said, a small smile forming. Ended up getting that scholarship to state because of it. You found your voice then, I said softly. Don't lose it now, Michael. He looked away, the implied criticism hitting home. It's complicated, Mom. Shirley has strong opinions, And she's given up a lot to raise the girls. We all make choices, I said. I chose to raise you alone rather than marry Tom Whitaker when he proposed, even though he could have given us financial security. Some sacrifices are worth making for the right reasons. I didn't know Tom proposed, Michael said, surprised. There's a lot you don't know, I replied gently. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. He looked uncomfortable, perhaps sensing the layers beneath my words. I love you, Mom. You know that, right? I love you too, Michael, I said, patting his cheek. That's never going to change. As I drove home to my modest ranch house, I found myself taking a detour past the real estate office I had maintained a relationship with for years. It was closed at this hour, but seeing the familiar signs sparked something in me. An idea was forming, not a confrontation, but a recalibration. The following Sunday, I arrived at Michael and Shirley's house for our regular dinner. I brought an apple pie that I knew would end up in the trash once I left, and a folder of documents I kept securely in my purse. The house looked different. Shirley had replaced the historically accurate shutters with modern ones that clashed with the colonial architecture. The front garden, which I had planted with period-appropriate herbs and flowers, had been ripped out and replaced with what Shirley called clean landscaping, geometric boxwoods and sterile rock formations. Inside, more changes awaited. The antique sideboard that had been in my husband's family for generations, which I had gifted them through the pretense of a fortuitous estate sale find, had been painted white and distressed in what Shirley called modern farmhouse style. I ran my finger along the edge where the original mahogany peeked through, feeling a pang for the craftsmanship now hidden beneath trendy chalk paint. Dinner proceeded as usual. Shirley talked about her latest design project for the mayor's wife. Michael mentioned a promotion he was being considered for, and the girls chattered about school and friends. I listened and nodded, playing my assigned role of the admiring audience. The mayor's wife has absolutely dreadful taste, Shirley confided. All those heavy antiques and dark colors. I'm trying to guide her towards something more contemporary, without offending her. I thought of the antique furniture I had carefully collected over the years, pieces chosen for their craftsmanship and history. In Shirley's world, these treasures were just old, dark, and out of style. Sometimes older things have value beyond their appearance, I suggested mildly. Character, history, stories. That's what museums are for, Shirley replied with a dismissive laugh. Homes should be for living, not preserving the past. I looked around at the house I had lovingly restored, now transformed into a showcase for Shirley's trendy design aesthetic, and felt a renewed resolve forming within me. Some history was worth preserving, whether Shirley recognized its value or not. After dinner, while Shirley took a business call, Michael and I sat on the back porch watching the girls play in the yard. The Colonial's expansive gardens were one of the features that had drawn me to purchase the property years ago. I had specifically chosen this house for Michael, knowing how much he'd loved playing in the creek that ran along the back edge of the property when he visited his grandparents' similar home as a child. You seem quiet tonight, Mom, Michael observed. Everything okay? I watched Emma pushing Lily on the swing I had installed last summer, another gift that had been presented as coming from a client of Shirley's who was upgrading their playground. Equipment. I've been thinking a lot lately, I said carefully, about the future, about what matters. That sounds serious, Michael said, attempting a light tone. It is, in a way, I replied. I'm not getting any younger, Michael, and there are some things I need to put in order. A flash of alarm crossed his face. You're not sick, are you? No, nothing like that, I assured him. Just taking stock of my life, what I've built, what I want to leave behind. You know I've never cared about inheritance, Mom, he said earnestly. Whatever you have, you should enjoy it. Take that cruise you've always talked about. I smiled at his generosity, knowing he had no idea of the true extent of my assets. My modest teacher's pension and the small life insurance policy David had left were all Michael thought I had. He didn't know about the shrewd investments I'd made over the years, the properties I'd slowly acquired, or the consulting work I still did for the Historical Preservation Society that supplemented my income. That's kind of you, but there are some things that can't wait for someday. I watched as Emma abandoned the swing to chase a butterfly, her laughter carrying across the lawn. Lily, determined to follow her sister, struggled to get out of the swing, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Remember how you used to chase butterflies in your grandfather's garden?" I asked. Michael's expression softened. "I was just thinking about that place the other day. Whatever happened to it after Grandpa died?" "It was sold," I said, not mentioning that I had been the buyer through one of my investment LLCs. Old houses like that take a lot of maintenance. Not everyone appreciates their history. "Shirley certainly doesn't," Michael said with a rueful laugh. "She's been talking about ripping out the original hardwood floors in the living room to put in something more contemporary." I felt a stab of dismay. Those floors were hand-milled oak from the 1870s, irreplaceable in today's market. I had spent a small fortune having them professionally restored when I purchased the house. "That would be a significant change," I managed. "Yeah, well, you know Shirley. Once she gets an idea in her head." He trailed off, then abruptly changed the subject. "Hey, did I tell you about the promotion I'm up for? Senior project manager. It would mean longer hours, but the salary increase would be substantial." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. Michael had always been dedicated to his engineering career, even as Shirley pushed him to pursue management roles that offered more prestige but took him away from the design work he loved. "Maybe if I get it, we can finally pay off some of these house renovations Shirley's been planning," he said. "The mortgage payments are manageable, but all these upgrades add up." I thought of the money they sent each month, deposited directly into an account I had set up specifically for their mortgage. Every penny went into a trust for Emma and Lily's education, a fact that neither Michael nor Shirley knew. Our conversation was interrupted by Shirley's return. "The girls need to start getting ready for bed," she announced, "and I need to review some fabric samples before tomorrow's client meeting." The dismissal was clear. I gathered my things, hugged my granddaughters tightly, and headed for the door. "Don't forget you're watching the girls on Saturday," Shirley reminded me. "We'll be home late, so you should plan to stay over in the guest room." "Actually," I said, "I was hoping the girls could stay at my place instead. I've set up a little craft area for them, and they've been wanting to make Christmas ornaments." Shirley frowned. "Your house isn't really child-proofed, Sherry. And Lily needs her special pillow or she won't sleep properly." "We can bring the pillow," I suggested. "And I've made some updates to make the house safer for the girls." "Updates?" Shirley's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "What kind of updates?" "You didn't mention any renovations? Just some small changes," I said vaguely. "Nothing expensive." "Well, we'll discuss it later in the week," Shirley said, clearly uncomfortable with a plan she hadn't orchestrated. "Michael will let you know what we decide." As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of calm. For 3 years, I had accommodated Shirley's every preference, deferred to her judgments, and hidden my true financial situation to protect my son's pride. I had endured the small humiliations and dismissals with grace and patience. But patience had its limits, and mine had finally been reached. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my modest ranch house. From the outside, it appeared to be exactly what Shirley thought it was, a simple, somewhat outdated home befitting a retired teacher on a fixed income. What Shirley didn't know was that behind the unpretentious facade, I had renovated the interior to reflect my true tastes and financial abilities. The kitchen featured top-of-the-line appliances hidden behind period-appropriate cabinet fronts. The bathrooms contained luxury fixtures that complemented rather than competed with the home's mid-century character. The craft area I'd mentioned was actually a fully equipped art studio where I pursued the painting I'd set aside during the busy years of raising Michael alone. I had created a life of hidden abundance, partly to protect Michael's pride, partly because I had never been one to flaunt wealth, but perhaps this modesty had gone too far. Perhaps it was time to reveal at least some of what I had built. The following morning, I made an appointment with my attorney, Harold Winters. Harold had been a friend of my late husband's and had helped me manage my investments in property holdings for years. He was one of the few people who knew the full extent of my financial situation. "Sherry," he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you in today?" I settled into the chair across from him and placed my folder on his desk. "I need to make some changes, Harold. Significant ones." His expression grew serious as he recognized my tone. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" "The house on Maple Street," I said. "The one Michael and Shirley are living in. I want to restructure the arrangement." Harold nodded slowly. He had advised against my secretive approach from the beginning, arguing that honesty would have been better than the elaborate fiction I had created. "You're finally going to tell them you own it?" he asked. "Not exactly," I replied. "At least, not yet. But I want to set some things in motion." I opened the folder and spread out the documents I had brought: property deeds, the operating agreement for Westfield Properties LLC, and recent correspondence from the Historical Preservation Society regarding the property. "I've just learned that Shirley is planning to make significant, irreversible changes to the house," I explained. "Changes that would destroy its historical integrity and greatly diminish its value." Harold frowned. "That's certainly her right. As what she believes to be a homeowner." "No, it isn't," I corrected. "If you check paragraph 12 of the lease agreement, which they believe is a mortgage, there's a clause requiring approval for structural or significant aesthetic changes to the property." Harold reviewed the document, his eyebrows rising. "This is unusually restrictive for what they believe to be a traditional mortgage." "Michael never reads the fine print," I said, a hint of maternal exasperation in my voice. And Shirley was too excited about the favorable interest rate to question the terms. "So what exactly do you want to do?" Harold asked. Over the next hour, I outlined my plan. Harold listened attentively, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "Are you sure about this, Sherry? Once you start this process, there's no going back." I thought about Thanksgiving dinner, about the casual cruelty of Shirley's words, about the way Michael had become a shadow of himself in his own home. I thought about the beautiful historical features of the house that were in danger of being destroyed by someone who didn't value them. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "It's time." Harold nodded and began drafting the necessary paperwork. As I signed the documents, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For years, I had carried the burden of my secrets alone, always putting others' feelings before my own needs, always being the understanding mother, the accommodating grandmother, the woman who knew her place. Just an old grandma who needs to stay in her lane, Shirley had called me. She had no idea how wide my lane actually was. As I left Harold's office, I received a text from Michael. "Shirley says girls can stay at your place Saturday. We'll drop. Off around 5:30. Need to bring anything?" I smiled as I typed my reply. "Just the girls and Lily's special pillow. I'll take care of the rest." It was time for my granddaughters to learn a bit more about their grandmother's lane. Saturday arrived with a light dusting of snow, transforming the neighborhood into a winter wonderland. I spent the morning preparing for my granddaughter's visit, setting out art supplies for our ornament-making project, and baking cookies that, for once, wouldn't end up in the trash. I had also taken the liberty of wrapping 2 special gifts, leather-bound journals I'd found at a local bookshop, each with a girl's initial embossed on the cover. The doorbell rang precisely at 5:30. Michael stood on the porch with the girls, all three of them bundled against the December chill. Shirley remained in the car, engine running, clearly impatient to leave for their party. "Grandma!" Lily launched herself at me, wrapping her arms around my legs. Emma followed more sedately, but her smile was genuine. "We brought my special pillow," Lily announced, holding up the lavender cushion like a trophy. "And Mom wrote out all the instructions," Emma added, handing me an envelope with a slightly apologetic look that seemed far too mature for her 7 years. Michael transferred their overnight bags to the entryway. "Thanks for doing this, Mom. The girls have been looking forward to it all week." "The pleasure is mine," I assured him. "We're going to have a wonderful time." He hesitated, glancing back at the idling car. "Shirley wanted me to remind you about Lily's bedtime routine and—" "It's all in the envelope," I said gently. "Don't worry, Michael. I've raised a child before, remember?" A car horn sounded from the driveway, short, impatient. Michael winced. "I should go. Shirley's worried about being late." "Go enjoy your evening," I said, waving him off. "We'll be fine." The girls and I had a magical evening. We made salt dough ornaments for their tree, read stories by the fireplace, and I showed them how to make my famous hot chocolate, with real chocolate melted into warm milk, not the powdered mix Shirley allowed on special occasions. When it was time for bed, I followed Lily's routine to the letter, knowing that some battles weren't worth fighting. "Your house is pretty, Grandma," Emma said as I tucked her into the trundle bed in the guest room. "It looks different than before." "I've made some changes," I acknowledged, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "Mom says old houses are too much work," she continued thoughtfully. "But I like old things. They have stories." "That's very perceptive of you," I said, touched by her insight. "Everything and everyone has a story, Emma, even Grandma's." She yawned, eyelids growing heavy. "Will you tell me your story sometime?" "I'd like that very much," I promised, kissing her forehead. The next morning, we made pancakes shaped like snowmen and took a walk through the snow-covered neighborhood. When we returned, rosy-cheeked and laughing, I decided it was time to show them something special. "Girls," I said, "I have a secret place I'd like to share with you." I led them to what appeared to be a linen closet in the hallway. When I pushed aside the hanging towels and pressed a concealed latch, a narrow door swung open, revealing a small spiral staircase. "A secret passage," Emma gasped, eyes wide. "Where does it go?" Lily demanded, already pushing forward. "To my special room," I explained, leading them up the stairs to the finished attic space that served as my private sanctuary. Unlike the rest of the house, which maintained its modest appearance, this room revealed my true tastes and resources. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, filled with rare first editions and beloved classics. A professional-grade easel stood near wide windows that flooded the space with natural light. Comfortable window seats were piled with handcrafted pillows, and display cases held collections of antique jewelry and miniature porcelain houses. "This is beautiful," Emma breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It's like a princess room," Lily exclaimed, immediately climbing onto a window seat to peer out at the snow-covered yard below. I showed them my paintings, landscapes, portraits, and several of Michael at various ages. I opened a leather album containing photographs of their father growing up, of the house they now lived in when it was first being restored, of their grandfather whom they had never met. "Why don't you show Mom and Dad these pictures?" Emma asked, studying a photograph of Michael at her age, sitting on the very porch where he now lived. "Some memories are like treasures," I explained carefully. "Sometimes we keep them safe until the right moment to share them." "Like a surprise present?" Lily suggested. "Something like that," I agreed. We spent the morning in my sanctuary, the girls asking questions about their father's childhood and my life before I was just a grandma. I answered truthfully but selectively, knowing that some revelations would need to wait. Shortly after noon, my phone rang. Michael, calling to say they were on their way to pick up the girls. I guided my granddaughters back downstairs, helping them gather their belongings and the ornaments they had made. When Michael and Shirley arrived, the tension was immediately palpable. Shirley's expression was tight, her movements stiff as she inspected the girls for any signs of improper care. "Did you sleep well, sweethearts?" she asked, running a critical eye over their clothing, the same outfits she had packed for them, now slightly rumpled from play. "We had the best time, Mom," Emma said enthusiastically. "Grandma has a secret room with paintings and books and—" "Secret room?" Shirley interrupted, her gaze snapping to me. "What is she talking about?" "My studio," I explained calmly. "It's in the finished attic space." "You have an art studio?" Michael asked, sounding surprised. "Since when do you paint?" "Since college," I replied. "I just recently started again." "And how exactly did you afford to finish the attic?" Shirley asked, her tone making it clear she thought I was being financially irresponsible. "Those kinds of renovations cost thousands. I've been saving for a long time," I said simply. Shirley's eyes narrowed. "Well, I hope you're not neglecting necessary repairs to indulge in hobbies. These old houses can become money pits if you're not careful." "I manage my finances quite well," I assured her, resisting the urge to mention that I had paid off the mortgage on this money pit years ago. "And Grandma made real hot chocolate," Lily added innocently, "with marshmallows." Shirley's expression hardened further. "I thought I was very clear about sugar consumption, Sherry." "It was a special occasion," I said mildly. "Special occasions don't exempt us from responsible parenting," Shirley replied coldly. "When we set boundaries for the girls, we expect them to be respected by everyone, including family." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sure Mom didn't mean any harm, Shirley." "Intent doesn't change the impact," she countered. "The girls have a routine for a reason. Disrupting it creates confusion and undermines our authority as parents." 1 cup of hot chocolate is hardly going to undo years of parenting, I pointed out. "This isn't just about hot chocolate," Shirley snapped. "It's about respect. When we make decisions for our children, they should be honored, not dismissed because you think you know better." "I wasn't dismissing anything," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the building frustration. "I was simply creating a special memory with my granddaughters." "At the expense of our parenting guidelines," Shirley retorted. "This is exactly what I was talking about at Thanksgiving. You refuse to acknowledge that times have changed. Child rearing isn't the same as when you were raising Michael. There's research now, evidence-based approaches." "Shirley," Michael interrupted, glancing nervously at the girls who were watching the exchange with wide eyes. "Maybe we should discuss this later." "No, I think we need to be clear right now," Shirley insisted. "Sherry, if you want to continue having unsupervised time with the girls, you need to commit to following our rules exactly as written. No exceptions, no special occasions, no undermining our decisions. Can you do that?" The question hung in the air, a challenge and an ultimatum wrapped in one. 3 years of accommodating Shirley's increasingly controlling behavior flashed through my mind. 3 years of swallowing my opinions, accepting her criticism, watching my son become someone I barely recognized. But now there was a new element in the equation. The signed document sitting in Harold's office, the plan already set in motion. "I'm their grandmother, Shirley," I said quietly. "Not a hired caregiver or a distant acquaintance. I have a relationship with Emma and Lily independent of my relationship with you. And while I respect your role as their mother, I won't agree to becoming a mere extension of your parenting style." Shirley's face flushed with anger. "Then I think it's best if future visits are supervised until you can demonstrate more respect for our boundaries." "Shirley, that's going too far," Michael protested weakly. "Is it?" she challenged. "Your mother clearly thinks she knows better than we do. She's deliberately undermining our parenting decisions. Would you tolerate that from anyone else?" Michael looked torn. his gaze moving between his wife and me, between the life he had built and the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "maybe for now it would be easier if I stayed in my lane?" I finished. For him, borrowing Shirley's phrase from Thanksgiving. He winced but didn't contradict me. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. After Michael, Shirley, and the girls left, I sat alone in my kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The confrontation had been inevitable, I supposed. 3 years of accumulated tensions and unspoken resentments couldn't be contained forever. My gaze drifted to the small cedar chest on my kitchen counter, one of the few possessions I had kept from my early life. Opening it, I withdrew a stack of yellowed photographs and faded letters, the tangible remnants of a journey that had begun long before Michael was born. The first photograph showed a young woman in a graduation cap and gown, her smile bright with promise and determination. Me, at 22, the first person in my family to earn a college degree. I had worked nights as a waitress and mornings as a library assistant to pay my way through school, refusing my parents' offer to help. They had already sacrificed enough, working multiple jobs to ensure I had opportunities they never did. The next photograph was of David and me on our wedding day, both of us laughing as we cut the cake in my parents' modest backyard. We had been so young, so full of dreams, David with his architectural ambitions, me with my teaching career just beginning. We had planned to wait 5 years before having children, giving ourselves time to establish our careers and save for a home. Life, as it often does, had other plans. David was diagnosed with a heart condition at 26, the same year I discovered I was pregnant with Michael. The doctors advised him to reduce stress, to prioritize his health over his career ambitions. We adjusted our dreams, moving to a smaller town where David took a less demanding position with a local firm. I continued teaching, grateful for the stability and health insurance my job provided. When Michael was born, our focus shifted entirely to him. David doted on our son, spending every free moment teaching him about building and design. Even as his health worsened, David made sure Michael's world remained secure and filled with love. Then came the photograph that still brought tears to my eyes. David in a hospital bed, 11-year-old Michael curled against his side, both of them working on a model house despite the IV tubes and monitoring equipment. It was taken 2 weeks before David died. The memory of those dark days remained painfully clear. The funeral expenses that depleted our modest savings. The sudden reality of being a single mother with a mortgage, a grieving child, and a teacher's salary that barely covered our basic needs. The well-meaning but often painful advice from friends and family. "You should sell the house and move somewhere cheaper," my sister Jane had suggested. "Tom Whitaker is still single, and he always had a thing for you," my mother had reminded me, repeatedly. "He's got that successful insurance business now." But I had made a promise to David in those final days, that I would keep our family home as long as possible, that I would ensure Michael could attend college, that I would never settle for security at the expense of my independence. Promises I had kept, though few people knew the cost. I shuffled through more photographs, Michael's high school graduation, his college move-in day, his first job at the engineering firm. Milestones marked by my increasingly visible aging, by the lines around my eyes that deepened with each passing year, by the silver that gradually replaced the brown in my hair. What wasn't visible in those photographs was the story behind them. The night classes I had taken to earn additional teaching certifications that increased my salary. The small inheritances from my parents and a childless aunt that I had invested, rather than spent. The summer jobs renovating houses with my brother-in-law that had taught me to appreciate the value of historical properties. And most importantly, the first small rental property I had purchased when Michael was in high school, a tiny duplex that generated just enough extra income to create a college fund. That duplex had led to another, then to a small apartment building, and eventually to the founding of Westfield Properties LLC, named after the street where David and I had first lived as newlyweds. By the time Michael met Shirley, Westfield Properties owned 6 rental units and the Colonial on Maple Street, which I had purchased from a distressed seller and lovingly restored over 2 years. I had planned to live there myself once Michael was settled in his own life, envisioning a peaceful retirement surrounded by the historical details I had so carefully preserved. Then Michael had brought Shirley home to meet me, bubbling with excitement, about the woman he had met at a friend's wedding. She was beautiful, accomplished, from a good family, with connections that could help his career. They had fallen in love quickly, with the intensity that often characterizes relationships formed in one's late 20s. That sense that time is moving quickly, that life should be established soon. When they announced their engagement 6 months later, I had seen the first warning signs. The way Shirley gently corrected Michael's table manners, the comments about his modest upbringing, that were framed as compliments, but carried an undercurrent of condescension. But I had said nothing, telling myself that every relationship requires adjustment, that Shirley's confidence might actually be good for my sometimes too accommodating son. The wedding had been elaborate, paid for primarily by Shirley's parents, who made it clear they expected Michael to rise to their daughter's standards. I had contributed what I could without revealing my full financial situation, aware that Michael's pride might be wounded if he knew his mother had quietly built a substantial nest egg while he grew up believing we were just getting by. After the honeymoon, reality had set in quickly. Michael and Shirley couldn't afford the kind of home Shirley felt reflected their status, not on Michael's entry-level engineering salary and Shirley's inconsistent income from her fledgling interior design business. They had looked at houses far beyond their means, each rejection deepening Shirley's frustration and Michael's sense of inadequacy. That's when I had made the decision that now, 3 years later, seemed increasingly misguided. I had approached them with a solution, a connection to Westfield Properties, which I portrayed as belonging to a former colleague who owed me a favor. The Colonial on Maple Street was available at a special arrangement due to this purported friendship, with payments structured more like rent than a traditional mortgage, though I presented it as a path to ownership. Michael had been hesitant, concerned about taking advantage of my relationship with this fictional benefactor. Shirley had been suspicious at first, then delighted by the opportunity to live in one of the most prestigious addresses in town at a fraction of its true cost. Neither had questioned the arrangement too deeply, accepting the unusual terms with minimal scrutiny. Michael, because he trusted me implicitly. Shirley, because the outcome aligned with her desires. They believed they were building equity in a home they would eventually own outright, while in reality, their monthly payments were going into education trusts for Emma and Lily. It had seemed like the perfect solution at the time. Michael and Shirley got the house they wanted, I maintained control over the property I had restored, and my granddaughter's futures were being secured without wounding anyone's pride. But deceptions, even well-intentioned ones, have a way of creating unforeseen complications. And now, as I replaced the photographs in the cedar chest, I wondered if my elaborate fiction had actually enabled the very behaviors I now found so troubling in my daughter-in-law and increasingly in my son. By hiding my accomplishments, had I allowed Shirley to underestimate me? By concealing my financial acumen, had I contributed to her dismissive attitude? By prioritizing Michael's pride over honesty, had I somehow undermined his growth? The questions had no easy answers. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The time for shadows and half-truths was coming to an end. 3 days after the confrontation over the hot chocolate, Michael showed up at my door unannounced. It was early evening, and I had just finished a call with Harold about the next steps in my plan. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and his tie loosened at the collar. I stepped aside to let him in, noting that he had come alone, a rarity these days. "Of course," I said. "Would you like some tea?" He nodded absently, following me to the kitchen where he sat heavily at the table. I busied myself with the kettle, giving him time to collect his thoughts. "Shirley's planning to renovate the entire first floor of the house," he finally said, staring down at his hands. "She's already hired a designer. They're going to tear out the original floors, remove the crown molding, knock down the wall between the living room and the dining room to create an open concept space." I set 2 mugs of tea on the table and sat across from him. "That sounds extensive. It's going to cost a fortune," he continued. "Money we don't really have, especially with the holidays coming up. But she's adamant that it needs to be done before she hosts her parents for Easter. What do you think about it?" I asked carefully. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I love that house the way it is. The craftsmanship, the history. It feels like a home, not a showroom. But Shirley says it's outdated, that it doesn't reflect our status or her professional aesthetic." I took a sip of tea, considering my next words carefully. "And what about what you want, Michael? Does that factor into the decision?" He looked up, surprised by the directness of my question. "It's complicated, Mom. Shirley has very strong opinions about design. It's her profession, after all. And she's been unhappy lately. The renovation would mean a lot to her." "I understand wanting to make your spouse happy," I said gently. "But marriage should be a partnership, not one person always deferring to the other." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "Is that why you came over on Sunday? To lecture me about my marriage?" "No," I replied calmly. "I came because you asked. To talk." He deflated, the brief flash of defensiveness giving way to weariness. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. It's just, things have been tense since Thanksgiving. And after what happened with the girls this weekend, Shirley was upset about the hot chocolate," I acknowledged. "Not just that," Michael corrected. "She was upset about your secret room, about you showing the girls family photos we supposedly haven't seen, about you creating what she called a competing narrative about our family." "A competing narrative?" I repeated, genuinely puzzled. "Her words, not mine," Michael clarified. "She thinks you're trying to undermine her relationship with the girls by presenting yourself as some kind of, I don't know, mysterious grandmother with hidden depths and secret spaces." Despite the seriousness of the conversation, I couldn't help but smile at the description. "I'm hardly mysterious, Michael. I'm the same person I've always been. The girls just happened to see a part of my life that Shirley hasn't bothered to ask about." "That's just it," Michael said, leaning forward. "Shirley feels like you've been keeping secrets. And when I tried to explain that you've always been interested in art, she got even more upset. She wanted to know why I never told her about your painting, about the attic studio, about all these things that apparently I should have known." "And what did you tell her?" I asked. Michael looked away, suddenly finding his tea fascinating. "I told her I didn't know either, that you'd never mentioned it to me." The admission hung in the air between us, painful in its honesty. He was right. I had never really shared that part of myself with him. After David died, I had packed away my paints and canvases, focusing entirely on being both mother and father to Michael. By the time he was grown, the habit of selective sharing was deeply ingrained. "You never asked," I said quietly. "After your father died, you stopped asking about who I was beyond your mother." Michael's eyes widened with hurt. "That's not fair. I was 11 when Dad died. I was grieving too." "You're right," I acknowledged. "And I don't blame you for that, Michael. Children aren't supposed to be curious about their parents' inner lives. That comes later, with adulthood. But even after you grew up, you never really asked." "I didn't know there was anything to ask about," he said defensively. "Didn't you?" I challenged gently. You never wondered how we managed financially after your father died? How a teacher's salary covered our mortgage, your college expenses, your first car? You never questioned how I always seemed to have enough, despite never remarrying or receiving any obvious windfalls? Michael's brow furrowed. I assumed you were just frugal, good with money. Mom, what are you trying to say? It was the opening I had been waiting for, the moment to begin unraveling the fabric of half-truths I had woven around our lives. But, looking at my son's confused face, I hesitated. Once certain truths were spoken, they could never be taken back. I'm saying, I began carefully, that there's more to your mother than being just an old grandma who needs to stay in her lane. I have a life, a history, accomplishments that have nothing to do with being your mother or the girl's grandmother. I know that, Michael said, but his tone lacked conviction. Do you? I pressed. Then why were you surprised to learn I paint? Why did you never question how I could afford to renovate the attic? Why do you accept Shirley's evaluation of me as someone who doesn't understand modern parenting or professional success? Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mom, I don't think of you that way. But you don't correct her when she does, I pointed out. You let her dismiss me, diminish me, treat me like I'm some relic from another era who couldn't possibly have anything valuable to contribute beyond occasional childcare and holiday meals. That's not, he began, then faltered. I don't mean to let that happen. I know you don't, I said softly. But it does happen, Michael. And it happened again at Thanksgiving when Shirley called me just an old grandma, and no one at that table, not you, not your children, contradicted her. Michael looked genuinely distressed now. I should have said something. I know that. But Shirley gets so defensive when I disagree with her, especially in front of her parents. It just seemed easier to let it go. Easier for whom? I asked. The question hung between us unanswered. After a moment, I continued, my voice firm but kind. I love you, Michael. You are the greatest joy of my life. But I won't be treated as if my only value comes from what I can provide to your family. I won't be dismissed or diminished, not even for the sake of keeping the peace. What are you saying? Michael asked, a note of alarm creeping into his voice. I'm saying that things are going to change, I replied, starting with those renovations Shirley is planning. Michael frowned. What do the renovations have to do with any of this? I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would alter our relationship irrevocably. Because Shirley can't make those changes without permission from the property owner, and despite what you both believe, that owner isn't Westfield Properties LLC. It's me. Michael stared at me, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a dawning comprehension that quickly hardened into something like betrayal. What do you mean you're the owner? He asked, his voice unnaturally calm. We've been paying the mortgage for 3 years. We have the paperwork. What you have is a lease agreement structured to look like a mortgage, I explained gently. The monthly payments go directly into trusts for Emma and Lily's education. Michael pushed back from the table abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. That's not possible. We signed with Westfield Properties. We have a deed. Westfield Properties is my company, Michael. I named it after the street where your father and I first lived together. And what you have is a land contract, not a traditional deed. It gives you occupancy rights, but not ownership until certain conditions are met. He stood up, pacing the small kitchen with agitated steps. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Why would you lie to us for 3 years? I never lied, I corrected, though I knew the distinction was semantic at best. I simply didn't tell you the whole truth. You assumed the house came from a colleague who owed me a favor, and I didn't correct that assumption. A lie of omission is still a lie, Mom. Michael's voice rose with indignation. We've been living in your house, thinking it was ours, making plans, talking about renovations. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I remained seated, keeping my voice steady despite the hurt his reaction caused. Would you have accepted if I had offered it outright? Of course not, he exclaimed. We're not charity cases. We don't need handouts. That's exactly why I structured it the way I did, I explained. I wanted you to have the house, Michael. It's perfect for your family, in a good school district, with the creek in the back that reminded me of where you played at your grandparents'. But I knew your pride would never let you accept it as a gift. So you deceived us instead? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart ache. How could you think that was better? I was trying to help without wounding your pride, I said quietly. And yes, I see now that was a mistake. I should have been honest from the beginning. Michael stopped pacing, fixing me with an incredulous stare. A mistake? That's what you call this? Mom, we've built our lives around that house. Shirley has her design business. We've enrolled the girls in the neighborhood school. We've made friends in the community. And now you're telling me it was all based on a lie? Not a lie, I insisted. An incomplete truth. The house is still your home, Michael. Nothing has to change. Everything has already changed, he snapped. You just dropped a bomb on our entire relationship, and you expect me to act like it's no big deal? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm in the face of his anger. I understand you're upset. You have every right to be, but I need you to understand why I'm telling you this now. Oh, I think I understand perfectly, Michael said bitterly. Shirley offended you at Thanksgiving, and this is your revenge. You're going to use this property ownership revelation to control what we can and can't do with your house. The accusation stung, partly because there was a kernel of truth in it. The timing of my revelation wasn't entirely coincidental. This isn't about revenge, I said firmly. But yes, I am concerned about the renovations Shirley is planning. That house is historically significant, Michael. The oak floors she wants to tear out are original to the building. The crown molding was hand-carved by a local artisan in 1872. These aren't just decorative elements. They're pieces of history. That can't be replaced once they're gone. Since when do you care about historical preservation? Michael demanded. You never mentioned any of this before. Since always, I replied simply. I've been consulting with the Historical Preservation Society for 15 years. I'm the one who restored that house before you moved in, replacing the modern fixtures with period-appropriate ones, researching the original paint colors, salvaging the antique hardware. Michael looked at me as if I were a stranger. Who are you? Because you're certainly not the mother I thought I knew. The words cut deep, but I maintained my composure. I'm exactly who I've always been, Michael. You just never bothered to look beyond the roles I played in your life. Mother, widow, grandmother. You never asked about my interests, my accomplishments, my dreams outside of caring for you and your family. That's not fair, he protested. You never shared any of this with me. Would you have listened if I had? I challenged gently. Or would you have dismissed it as the quaint hobbies of just an old grandma who needs to stay in her lane? Michael flinched at the echo of Shirley's words. I would never think of you that way. But you let Shirley say it, I pointed out. You let her dismiss me, diminish me, treat me like I'm nothing more than convenient childcare and occasional cooking help. And you stood by while she planned to destroy the historical integrity of a house I spent 2 years lovingly restoring. She doesn't know about your connection to the house, Michael said defensively. How could she possibly take that into account? That's exactly my point, I replied. Neither of you ever bothered to ask. You just assumed you knew everything there was to know about me. Michael paced again, processing the implications of what I'd revealed. So what happens now? Are you going to evict us? Force Shirley to abandon her renovation plans? Of course not, I said, surprised by the dramatic leap. I just want my voice to be heard. I want my expertise to be respected. I want to be treated like a person with valid opinions and valuable knowledge, not an obsolete relic whose only function is to serve your family. And if Shirley disagrees? Michael asked. If she still wants to renovate? Then we'll need to have a conversation, all of us, about compromises that respect both her design aesthetic and the historical value of the property. Michael laughed humorlessly. You clearly don't know Shirley very well if you think that conversation will go smoothly. Perhaps not, I acknowledged. But it's a conversation we need to have regardless. And it needs to start with you telling her the truth about the house. The color drained from Michael's face. Me? No, Mom. If you want to blow up our lives with this revelation, you should be the one to tell her. This isn't about blowing up anything, I said firmly. It's about honesty and respect. And yes, I will be part of that conversation, but as her husband, you need to be the one to initiate it. She's going to be furious, Michael said, his voice suddenly small. She'll see this as a betrayal, as manipulation. She might, I agreed, at first. But once she understands the full context doesn't matter to Shirley when she feels she's been deceived, Michael interrupted. And she's right in this case. We have been deceived for years. He grabbed his coat from the back of the chair and headed for the door. Michael, wait, I called, rising to follow him. We need to finish this discussion. We need to make a plan for how to move forward. He paused at the door, his back to me. I need some time to process this, Mom. And I need to figure out how I'm going to tell my wife that we don't actually own our home, that my mother has been pulling the strings all along. That's not how it is, I protested. Isn't it? He turned to face me, his expression wounded. You created an elaborate fiction, kept me in the dark about your financial situation, made decisions about my family's future without consulting us. And now you're using this revelation to exert control over what we can and can't do with the house. How would you describe it? Before I could answer, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. After Michael left, I stood in the silent kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I cleared away our untouched tea. The confrontation had gone both better and worse than I had anticipated. Better, because the truth was finally out. Worse, because I hadn't fully prepared myself for the hurt and betrayal in my son's eyes. I moved to the living room and sank into my favorite armchair, suddenly exhausted. The weight of years of half-truths and careful omissions pressed down on me like a physical burden. Had I been wrong all this time? Had my attempts to protect Michael's pride actually been about maintaining control? The questions swirled uncomfortably, in my mind. Outside, the early December darkness had fallen, and I could see my reflection in the window glass. A woman in her mid-60s, silver hair cut in a practical bob, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. The image of a conventional grandmother, comfortable and unthreatening. The image I had cultivated for years, perhaps to my own detriment. I reached for the phone, then set it back down. My first instinct was to call Michael, to continue explaining, to make him understand. But I knew from experience that pushing too hard when he was upset only made him retreat further. He needed time to process, to adjust to this new reality. We both did. Instead, I called my sister Jane, the one person who knew the full extent of my financial situation and the arrangement with Michael's house. He stormed out? Jane asked after I recounted what had happened. Well, what did you expect? You've been hiding your success from that boy his entire adult life. I wasn't hiding it, I protested weakly. I just didn't emphasize it. Jane snorted. Sherry, you've been playing the modest widow for so long you've forgotten who you really are. When was the last time you actually took credit for your accomplishments? When was the last time you told anyone about the properties you've restored, the investments you've made, the business you've built? I didn't answer immediately. recognizing the truth in her words. I didn't want to make Michael feel inadequate, I finally said. After David died, he took on this sense of responsibility, like he had to be the man of the house. I didn't want to undermine that. He was 11 when David died, Jane reminded me gently. He's 36 now. Don't you think it's time to let him see you as you really are? Not just his mother or his children's grandmother, but a whole person with her own identity? Apparently I'm about 25 years too late for that, I said with a sigh. You should have seen his face, Jane. It was like he was looking at a stranger. That's on him as much as it's on you, Jane replied firmly. You may have downplayed your success, but he never bothered to ask, did he? Never showed interest in who you were beyond his mother. The observation stung because it echoed my own thoughts during the confrontation with Michael. How many times had I started to share something about my investments or my preservation work, only to notice his eyes glazing over? How often had I mentioned a new property acquisition, only to have him change the subject to something about his own life? I enabled it, I admitted. I let him see only what he wanted to see. We all did, Jane said. But that doesn't mean you have to keep doing it. And it certainly doesn't mean you have to let that daughter-in-law of yours treat you like you're nothing more than free childcare. The mention of Shirley brought a fresh wave of anxiety. Michael's going to tell her about the house. I don't think she'll take it well. Of course she won't, Jane said bluntly. She's built her whole identity around being the sophisticated one, the one with taste and connections. Finding out that her mother-in-law, whom she's been condescending to for years, actually owns the house she's been planning to renovate? That's going to shatter her self-image. I never meant to humiliate her, I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I recognized a small, uncharitable part of me that wasn't entirely sorry about the comeuppance Shirley was about to receive. Maybe a little humility would do her good, Jane suggested, echoing my unspoken thought. That girl has needed a reality check since the day Michael brought her home. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, Jane's words echoing in my mind. Had I been complicit in my own diminishment? By hiding my accomplishments, by playing the role of the modest widow and unassuming grandmother, had I invited the very treatment I now resented? The answer, uncomfortable as it was, seemed to be yes. I thought back to the day David died, the shock and grief that had nearly overwhelmed me, the terror of suddenly being solely responsible for an 11-year-old boy, the desperate determination to ensure Michael didn't suffer more than necessary from the loss of his father. In those early days, downplaying my own grief to focus on Michael's had been necessary. Later, working multiple jobs while maintaining a cheerful demeanor at home had been an act of love. And later still, not burdening him with financial worries during his college years had seemed the right thing to do. But somewhere along the way, this protective instinct had morphed into something else, a habit of self-effacement, a tendency to make myself smaller for the comfort of others. I had continued playing the role of the self-sacrificing mother long after Michael had grown into a man capable of seeing me as a full person with my own identity and accomplishments. And in doing so, I had set the stage for Shirley's dismissive attitude, for Michael's neglect of my personhood, for the family dynamic that had finally reached its breaking point at Thanksgiving. Just an old grandma who needs to stay in her lane, I murmured to the empty room, tasting the words that had sparked this long overdue reckoning. That phrase had wounded me deeply because part of me had begun to believe it, to accept the narrow role assigned to me by my daughter-in-law and tacitly endorsed by my son, to see myself primarily as an extension of their family rather than as a woman with her own meaningful life. But the truth was so much more complex. I was a widow who had rebuilt her life after devastating loss, a mother who had raised a son alone while building financial security, a businesswoman who had created a successful property investment company, a preservationist who had saved historical buildings from destruction or inappropriate modernization, an artist who had returned to her passion after decades focused on practical concerns. I was all of these things, and it was past time, for my family to see me in my full complexity. Even if that recognition came at the cost of temporary discomfort and disruption. Rising from my chair with new resolve, I walked to my desk and retrieved a folder containing the legal documents related to the house on Maple Street. Whatever happened, next I would face it with honesty and without apology for who I was or what I had built. The time for hiding in the shadows of my own life was over. I didn't hear from Michael the next day, or the day after. I resisted the urge to call him, knowing he needed space to process what he'd learned and to figure out how to tell Shirley. Instead, I focused on preparing myself for the inevitable confrontation, reviewing the legal documents with Harold, and clarifying exactly what rights and responsibilities each party had under our unusual arrangement. "You're within your legal rights to prevent the renovations," Harold confirmed during our meeting. "The agreement specifically requires written approval for any structural changes or alterations that would affect the historical character of the property." "That's not my goal," I said, though part of me did want to protect the house's original features. "I just want them to understand who I really am, to see me as more than just an old grandma who can be dismissed or manipulated." Harold nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Be prepared, Sherry. This revelation is going to fundamentally change your relationship with them. Not necessarily for the worse in the long run, but there will be turbulence." I appreciated his candor. "I know, but I can't go back to the way things were." On the third day after Michael's visit, my phone rang shortly after dinner. It was Michael, his voice tense and controlled. "Mom, we need to talk. All of us. Can you come over tomorrow evening around 7? "Of course," I agreed. "Have you told Shirley?" There was a brief silence. "Yes, last night." "How did she take it?" I asked, though I could guess from his tone. "She's processing," he said diplomatically. "Just come tomorrow, okay? We need to figure this out as a family." The next evening, I arrived at the Colonial House precisely at 7, a folder of documents, tucked into my purse. The home looked beautiful in the early winter darkness, its windows glowing warmly, the holiday wreath on the door a cheerful contrast to the tension I knew awaited inside. Michael answered the door, his face drawn and tired. "Thanks for coming," he said, the formality in his tone a painful reminder of the distance my revelation had created. In the living room, Shirley sat rigidly on the sofa, an untouched glass of wine on the coffee table before her. Her expression was carefully neutral, but the tightness around her eyes and mouth betrayed her anger. "Sherry," she greeted me, not rising. "Please, sit down." I chose an armchair across from them, setting, my purse beside me. "Thank you for agreeing to talk this through," I began. "Did we have a choice?" Shirley asked, her voice brittle. "You own our home, apparently, a fact you kept hidden for 3 years while watching me make plans and investments in a property that isn't even mine." "The house is still your home," I said gently. "Nothing has to change in terms of your living situation." "Everything has already changed," Shirley snapped, echoing Michael's words from our previous conversation. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I've been showcasing this house to clients, using it as an example of my design work, building my business reputation on the renovations I've done here. And now I find out it was all based on a lie." I looked to Michael, but he was staring at his clasped hands, leaving me to navigate Shirley's anger alone. "I understand why you feel deceived," I acknowledged. "And I apologize for not being transparent from the beginning. But my intention was never to humiliate or control you. I wanted to provide a beautiful home for my son and his family without wounding his pride." "How generous of you," Shirley said sarcastically. "And I suppose the fact that you've been secretly judging every change I've made to your house has nothing to do with why you've suddenly decided to reveal this information?" Just when I was planning significant renovations? I have concerns about the renovations, I admitted, particularly those that would permanently alter the historical features of the house. But this isn't about control. It's about having a voice in decisions that affect something I care deeply about. Something you care about more than your relationship with your son, apparently, Shirley retorted. That's unfair, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the sting of her words. I care deeply about my relationship with Michael, with all of you. But that doesn't mean I should continue to be invisible, to have my knowledge and expertise dismissed, to be treated as if I'm nothing more than a convenient resource for childcare and holiday meals. Michael finally looked up, his expression troubled. Mom, no one thinks of you that way. Don't they? I challenged gently. Shirley called me just an old grandma who needs to stay in her lane at Thanksgiving. Neither you nor anyone else at that table contradicted her. Shirley flushed slightly but didn't back down. It was a heated moment. You're being oversensitive. Am I? I asked. Or am I finally standing up for myself after years of deferring to everyone else's feelings and priorities? Michael sighed heavily. Look, what's done is done. We need to figure out where we go from here. Mom, what exactly do you want? It was the question I had been preparing for, the one that would define the new boundaries of our relationship. But before I could answer, Shirley leaned forward, her expression suddenly calculating. Actually, I think I have a solution that would work for everyone, she said. Sherry, you've clearly been very successful financially, much more so than you've let on. If you want to maintain ownership of this house for sentimental or investment reasons, that's your prerogative. But there's a simple way to resolve this. Situation cleanly. I'm listening, I said cautiously. Sell us the house, Shirley stated. Not with some convoluted lease agreement, not with strings attached. A straightforward sale at current market value. Michael and I will secure a conventional mortgage, and you'll receive fair compensation for your investment. Then we can all move forward with a clean slate. Shirley, we've discussed this, Michael said, looking uncomfortable. The current market value is way beyond what we can afford. She waved off his concern. We'll make it work. Your mother can give us a family discount, or we can negotiate terms. The important thing is that ownership transfers completely to us, with no conditions about renovations or historical preservation. It would be our house, to do with as we see fit. I understood immediately what Shirley was trying to do. This wasn't about finding a fair solution. It was about regaining control, about erasing the revelation that I was more than what she had assumed me to be. I'm not interested in selling, I said simply. Shirley's eyes narrowed. So this is about control. You want to hold this over our heads, to force us to defer to your outdated decorating preferences. No, I corrected. This is about honesty, about being seen and respected for who I actually am, not who you've decided I should be. And who exactly is that? Shirley challenged. The woman who had the vision and expertise to recognize this house's potential when it was a neglected property on the market. The woman who spent 2 years researching its history and restoring its original features. The woman who built a successful real estate investment business while raising a son alone. The woman who has been treated like an irrelevant relic by her daughter-in-law, while actually owning the very roof over her head. The bluntness of my response left Shirley momentarily speechless. Michael looked between us, clearly torn between his wife's anger and his growing recognition of the truth in my words. Mom, he finally said, what do you want from us? Really? What do I want? I repeated Michael's question, considering my answer carefully. I want to be seen. I want to be respected for who I am, not who you've assumed me to be. I want my expertise about this house, its history, its architectural significance to be valued. And I want my relationship with my granddaughters to be based on who I truly am, not some sanitized version that Shirley finds acceptable. Shirley made a dismissive sound. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we've somehow oppressed you when you're the one who's been deceiving us for years. I think we should continue this conversation another time, Michael interjected, clearly sensing that things were only going to escalate. We all need some space to process. I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his suggestion. That's reasonable. But I want to be clear. I have no intention of disrupting your lives or taking away your home. I just want honesty and respect going forward. How generous, Shirley muttered. Michael walked me to the door, his expression troubled. Mom, he began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. It's all right, I said softly. This is difficult for everyone. We'll figure it out. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying the confrontation, analyzing what I could have said differently, wondering if I had pushed too hard too fast. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt drained, as if I had run a marathon. Inside, I moved through my evening routine mechanically, hanging up my coat, making a cup of tea, checking that the doors were locked. But when I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror, something inside me finally broke. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles turning white as I stared at my own face. The carefully maintained composure I had held throughout. The confrontation with Shirley crumbled, leaving raw emotion in its wake. The tears came suddenly, hot and unrestrained. I sank to the floor, my back against the cool tile wall, and sobbed. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to tear loose from the very core of my being. I cried for the young widow who had hidden her grief to protect her son. For the middle-aged mother, who had concealed her financial success to spare her son's pride. For the grandmother who had accepted dismissal and condescension rather than risk conflict. I cried for the years I had made myself smaller, less visible, less threatening. For the accomplishments I had downplayed or hidden entirely. For the woman I might have been if I hadn't spent so many years prioritizing everyone's comfort but my own. No more, I whispered through my tears. No more hiding. No more pretending. No more. When the storm of emotion finally passed, I hauled myself up from the floor, splashed cold water on my face, and moved to my bedroom. On impulse, I pulled a large storage box from the back of my closet, a container I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the tangible reminders of the life I had built outside of my role as mother and grandmother. Awards from the Historical Preservation Society. Newspaper clippings about restoration projects I had consulted on. Photographs of properties I had purchased, renovated, and either sold at a profit or added to my rental portfolio. Near the bottom of the box was a framed certificate. My real estate license, earned when Michael was in high school. I had taken the classes at night after teaching all day, studying while he slept, determined to create a more secure financial future for us both. I had never displayed these tokens of achievement in my home, partly out of an ingrained modesty, partly because I had convinced myself they weren't important compared to my role as Michael's mother. But now I saw that choice for what it was, a kind of self-erasure, a complicity in how others perceived me. Picking up my phone, I called Jane, not caring about the late hour. I just had the confrontation with Shirley, I said when she answered. It went about as well as you'd expect. Let me guess, Jane replied. She's furious and trying to regain control of the situation. She wants me to sell them the house outright. No conditions, no input on renovations. Jane snorted. Of course she does. That would let her save face and erase the fact that you've been holding the cards all along. Tell me you said no. I did, I confirmed. But Jane, afterward I just fell apart. I've been sitting here crying like I haven't cried since David died. That's not surprising, Jane said gently. You're grieving, in a way. Grieving the relationship you thought you had, with Michael and his family. Grieving the version of yourself you've been presenting to the world for decades. Her insight struck me with the force of revelation. I've been hiding for so long, I whispered, making myself smaller, accepting less than I deserve. And now you're finally taking up the space you've earned, Jane said. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. But it's necessary. What if I lose them? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if standing up for myself cost me my relationship with Michael, with the girls? Then they weren't relationships worth having, Jane replied bluntly. Real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself. Real love celebrates who you truly are, all of you, not just the convenient, self-sacrificing parts. After we hung up, I sat on my bed, surrounded by the evidence of a life I had kept hidden even from myself in many ways. Jane was right. I was grieving. But this grief felt cleansing, like the necessary pain of lancing an old wound to finally allow healing. I began to sort through the items from the box, no longer content to keep them hidden away. The framed certificate would go on my office wall. The newspaper clippings would be organized in an album, not hidden in a box. The awards would find places of honor on my bookshelves. As I handled each item, each tangible reminder of my capabilities and accomplishments, I felt something inside me straightening, strengthening. The woman who had sat on the bathroom floor, sobbing, was still me, but she was no longer the whole of me. By the time dawn broke, I had transformed my home, integrating these previously hidden aspects of my life into my living space. My house now reflected who I truly was, not just a mother and grandmother, but a businesswoman, a preservationist, a person of substance and achievement. I stood in my living room surveying the changes. For the first time in decades, I felt whole, integrated. The various parts of my identity no longer compartmentalized, no longer hidden from view. Whatever happened next with Michael and Shirley, I would face it as my complete self. No more hiding, no more diminishment, no more accepting less than the respect I had earned. The road ahead would not be easy, I harbored no illusions about that. But I would walk it on my own terms, standing firmly in my truth. It was, I realized, the most important renovation I had ever undertaken. 3 days passed with no word from Michael or Shirley. I used the time to continue my personal transformation, scheduling appointments with Harold to review my entire portfolio, updating my will, and even hiring a professional photographer to take proper headshots for the Historical Preservation Society's website, where I had previously been listed only by name. On the 4th day, my phone rang. It was Shirley. "Sherry," she began without preamble, her voice professionally pleasant in a way that immediately put me on guard. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I believe I've come up with a compromise that will work for everyone." "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "I understand your concerns about preserving certain elements of the house," she continued. "So I'm willing to modify our renovation plans. We'll keep the original hardwood floors in the entrance hall and the crown molding in the formal dining room. Those are the areas most visible to visitors anyway." She paused, clearly expecting appreciation for this concession. When I remained silent, she pressed on. "In exchange, we'd like you to sign an agreement giving us full authority over all other aspects of the property. No more approval requirements. No more consulting with historical societies. Just a clean, simple arrangement that respects your sentimental attachment while allowing us to make the home truly ours." The old me would have jumped at this compromise, grateful for any acknowledgement of my concerns, eager to smooth things over. But as I sat in my newly rearranged living room, surrounded by visible reminders of my expertise and accomplishments, I felt only a calm certainty. "No," I said simply. There was a moment of startled silence on the other end of the line. "Excuse me?" Shirley finally responded, her professional tone slipping. "I said no," I repeated. "That's not a compromise, Shirley. That's you offering minimal concessions in exchange for complete control. The house isn't just sentimentally important to me, it's historically significant. The craftsmanship throughout. The property deserves to be preserved, not just in the areas visitors see." "This is ridiculous," Shirley snapped, dropping all pretense of cordiality. You're being completely unreasonable. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect my expertise to be valued, I replied calmly. I restored that house. I researched its history. I've consulted on historical preservation projects for 15 years. I've even published articles on period-appropriate restoration techniques. And you never thought to mention any of this before? The incredulity in her voice would have stung once. Now it simply confirmed what I already knew about how she saw me. Would you have listened if I had? I asked. Or would you have dismissed it as the quaint hobby of just an old grandma? Her sharp intake of breath told me the barb had hit home. Michael said you might be difficult, she said after a moment. He suggested we might need to take a different approach. And what approach is that? I asked. The girls miss you, Shirley said, her voice softening artificially. Emma keeps asking when they can visit your secret room again. It would be such a shame if this disagreement about the house affected your relationship with your granddaughters. The implied threat was clear, and a week ago it would have worked perfectly. The fear of losing access to Emma and Lily would have been enough to make me cave immediately, but not anymore. That would be a shame indeed, I agreed. Using children as leverage in an adult disagreement is never appropriate. I would hope we're both better than that, Shirley. I'm not, she began defensively. I love my granddaughters, I continued, cutting her off. And I believe they love me. If you choose to restrict their relationship with me because I won't bow to your demands about the house, that's a decision you'll have to explain to them someday. Are you threatening me? She asked, her voice rising. Not at all, I replied. I'm simply declining to be manipulated. The house and my relationship with Emma and Lily are separate issues, and I won't allow you to link them. Michael was right, Shirley said coldly. You've changed. I don't even recognize you anymore. I haven't changed, Shirley, I corrected her. I've just stopped hiding who I've always been, and that's not going to change back, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you. The line went dead as she hung up abruptly. I sat for a moment, waiting, for the guilt and anxiety to flood in, the familiar emotional aftermath of standing up for myself. But instead, I felt oddly peaceful. Setting down the phone, I returned to the article I had been writing for the Preservation Society's quarterly journal, a piece about recognizing and protecting historical elements in residential renovations. The irony wasn't lost on me. The day after my conversation with Shirley, I met Harold for breakfast at a small cafe downtown. The restaurant was bustling with holiday shoppers taking breaks between stores, the atmosphere festive with garlands and twinkling lights adorning the windows. She actually tried to use your granddaughters as leverage? Harold asked, his bushy eyebrows rising in disapproval. That's a low tactic. She's desperate, I replied, stirring my coffee. Finding out I own their house has upended her understanding of our relationship. She's trying to regain control any way she can. Harold nodded thoughtfully. So what's your next move? The legal standing is clear, but family dynamics rarely follow. Legal logic. I've been thinking about that, I said. I want to formalize everything. No more ambiguity, no more hidden arrangements. I want everything in writing, transparent and clear. From my purse, I pulled out a notepad where I had outlined my plan. Harold reviewed it, occasionally making comments or asking questions. By the time we finished breakfast, we had a concrete action plan. Our first stop was the bank, where I opened new accounts and restructured how the mortgage payments would be handled. Instead of the money going directly into the girls' education, trusts, it would now go into a transparent escrow account. Michael and Shirley would receive quarterly statements showing exactly where their payments were being applied. This creates clarity without changing the financial substance. Harold observed as we left the bank. Smart move. Next, we visited the county recorder's office, where I filed updated property documents that clearly listed me as the owner while formalizing Michael and Shirley's occupancy rights. The clerk, who knew me from my preservation work, raised an eyebrow at the unusual arrangement, but processed the paperwork without comment. "This removes any legal ambiguity," Harold said as we walked to his office. "They can't claim they didn't know the true ownership situation going forward." At Harold's office, we drafted 2 additional documents. The first was a formal agreement regarding property modifications, outlining a collaborative process for any renovations. It required consultation with a historical preservation expert, not necessarily me, before any changes to original architectural elements could be made. "This removes the perception that it's just about your personal preferences," Harold noted as he reviewed the language. "It makes preservation the focus, not control." The second document was more personal, a letter to Michael detailing the full history of my financial journey after his father's death. I included copies of investment statements, property deeds, and the formation documents for Westfield Properties LLC. It was a complete accounting of how I had built security for us both while maintaining the illusion of just getting by. "Are you sure about this level of disclosure?" Harold asked as I signed the letter. "Some of these investments are quite impressive. It might be a lot for him to process all at once." "No more secrets," I said firmly. "I want him to see the whole truth, even if it's uncomfortable. It's the only way we can build an honest relationship going forward." Our final stop was a jeweler downtown. There, I selected 2 matching silver lockets, one for each of my granddaughters. Inside each, I placed a tiny photograph of their grandfather, David, whom they had never met, and a small note that simply read, "Your history is precious. Love, Grandma." "The girls are innocent in all this," I explained to Harold as the jeweler wrapped the gifts. "Whatever happens with Michael and Shirley, I want Emma and Lily to have something that connects them to their family history." As the afternoon light began to fade, Harold and I parted ways outside his office. "You're doing the right thing, Sherry," he said, clasping my hand warmly. "It may not feel like it immediately, but transparency is always better in the long run, thank you." "You for your help today," I replied, "and for your friendship all these years." When I returned home, I found a text message from Michael. "Mom, can we talk? Just the 2 of us." "Tomorrow morning?" I replied with a simple, "Yes," adding my address and suggesting 10 a.m. Then I carefully organized all the documents and paperwork from the day's activities, placing them in a leather portfolio I had once used for business meetings. Looking around my home, now filled with visible evidence of my full identity, I felt a sense of completion. The practical steps I had taken today weren't just about legal protection or financial transparency. They were concrete manifestations of my internal transformation, external actions that aligned with my newfound commitment to living authentically. Whatever happened with Michael tomorrow, I was ready. No more hiding, no more diminishing myself, no more accepting less than I deserved. I had finally stepped fully into who I was, not just a mother or grandmother, but a woman of substance and achievement, and I wasn't going back. Michael arrived promptly at 10 the next morning. I invited him in, offering coffee, which he accepted, with a distracted nod. He looked tired but calmer than during our previous encounters, the initial shock of my revelation having apparently settled into something more contemplative. We sat in my living room, and I could see him taking in the changes, the framed awards now displayed on the walls, the professional photographs of restoration projects arranged on the bookshelf, the architectural books and journals stacked neatly on the coffee table. "Your house looks different," he observed, his eyes lingering on a certificate from the Historical Preservation Society. "It reflects who I really am now," I replied simply. Michael nodded slowly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation. And I owe you an apology, Mom. Not just for how things went down at the house with Shirley, but for not seeing you. Not really seeing you for a long time." His words caught me by surprise. I had prepared for defensiveness, for negotiation, even for continued anger. I hadn't expected this moment of genuine self-reflection. I appreciate that, I said quietly. Michael set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his expression earnest. When Dad died, you became everything to me. Mother, father, provider, protector. I think somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as a person separate from those roles. You were just Mom. Always there, always strong, always putting me first. That was my choice, I acknowledged. But perhaps I took it too far, hiding parts of myself that might have complicated that image. Maybe, Michael agreed. But I should have asked, should have wondered. After I grew up, I should have been curious about who you were beyond being my mother. The honesty in his voice touched me deeply. We both played our parts, I said. But we can choose different ones going forward. I reached for the leather portfolio I had prepared yesterday, handing it to him. This contains everything. The true financial history of our family after your father died, the formation of Westfield Properties, the legal documents I filed yesterday clarifying the house situation. No more secrets, Michael. It's all there. He accepted the portfolio but didn't open it immediately. Shirley and I have been talking, he said instead. Really talking, probably for the first time in years. This situation with the house, it's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our relationship. Such as, I prompted gently, such as the fact that I've been letting her make most of the decisions to avoid conflict, that I actually hate the idea of ripping out the original features of the house but never said so, that I've allowed her to treat you with less respect than you deserve because it was easier than standing up to her. His candor was refreshing, like a cool breeze clearing away the stale air of unspoken tensions. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, we were speaking to each other honestly without the protective filters we had both maintained for so long. What happens now? I asked. Michael smiled slightly. Now we start over, as adults who see each other clearly. The changes in my relationship with Michael began to ripple outward in ways I hadn't anticipated. After our honest conversation and his review of the financial documents I'd provided, Michael approached the house situation with new understanding. I showed Shirley the portfolio, he told me during a phone call the following week. She was overwhelmed, to put it mildly. Finding out you've been a successful real estate investor all these years while she's been condescending to you about finances, it's been quite an adjustment for her. I can imagine, I said, though without the satisfaction I might once have expected to feel. This wasn't about humiliating Shirley, it was about establishing truth. She's agreed to consult with a historical preservation specialist about the renovations, Michael continued. Not because she has to, but because she's beginning to see the value in what you've been saying all along. The historical elements of the house are what make it special. This news surprised me. That's a significant change of heart. It's more complicated than that, Michael admitted. The truth is, she's been struggling with her design business. Several clients have gone with other designers who specialize in historical properties, the very expertise she dismissed when it came from you. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept my tone neutral. The Preservation Society offers workshops for designers interested in period-appropriate renovations. I could send her the information if she's interested. I think she might be, actually, Michael said, sounding cautiously optimistic. Meanwhile, my relationship with my granddaughters took on new dimensions. The silver lockets had been Christmas gifts delivered during a carefully negotiated holiday dinner at a neutral restaurant. Emma, now old enough to understand the significance of family history, had asked questions about the grandfather she'd never met. "Was he an artist like you, Grandma?" she'd asked, examining the tiny photograph in her locket. "He was an architect," I explained. "He designed buildings and loved beautiful old houses, just like the one you live in now." "Is that why you know so much about old houses?" Lily had piped up. "Partly," I'd acknowledged. "But I've learned a lot on my own, too, over many years. Shirley, who had been listening to this exchange, surprised me by adding, "Your grandma is actually very knowledgeable about historical homes, more than most people I know professionally." It was a small acknowledgement, but significant coming from her. Perhaps the most unexpected ripple effect came from my sister Jane, who had observed my transformation with growing admiration. "You've inspired me," she told me over lunch in early January. "Watching you claim your power after all these years made me realize how much I've been holding back in my own life." Jane, always the more outspoken of us, had apparently been deferring her own dream of writing a cookbook for years, believing it was too late to start something new at 63. "If my supposedly meek sister can stand up to her daughter-in-law and reclaim her identity," Jane said with a grin, "then I can certainly publish a cookbook of family recipes." As January progressed, the initial upheaval of my revelation gradually settled into a new normal. The relationship with Michael had deepened through honesty. Shirley maintained a polite distance, but the open hostility had faded. The girls visited my secret room regularly, now with their parents' knowledge and blessing. One unexpected development came when the local newspaper ran a feature on historical homes in our area. They interviewed me as a preservation expert, and the accompanying photograph showed me standing proudly in front of the Colonial on Maple Street, identified in the caption as a Westfield Properties restoration project helmed by local expert Sherry Winters. By early February, the initial storm of revelations had calmed. I had settled into my authentic life, continuing my work with the Preservation Society, and even accepting an invitation to teach a workshop on historical restoration techniques at the community college. My relationship with Michael had evolved into something more equal, more honest. A friendship between adults rather than just a mother-son dynamic. It was during this period of relative peace that Shirley reached out, asking if we could meet. For coffee, just the two of us. Curious but cautious, I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown, away from the usual family haunts. Shirley arrived impeccably dressed as always, but there was something different about her demeanor. Less brittle, perhaps, or simply more thoughtful. "Thank you for meeting me," she began after we'd ordered. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past few weeks." "About?" I prompted when she hesitated. "About how I've treated you," she said, surprising me with her directness. "And about why?" "The truth is, Sherry, I've always felt intimidated by you. Of all the things I had expected her to say, this wasn't even on the list." "Intimidated? By me?" Shirley nodded, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. "You raised Michael alone after his father died. You put him through college on a teacher's salary. You never remarried or seemed to need anyone. You were this pillar of self-sufficiency. It made me feel inadequate by comparison." I listened, fascinated by this glimpse into how she had perceived me all these years. "So I dealt with my insecurity by diminishing you," she continued, "by casting you as old-fashioned and out of touch. It made me feel more secure somehow. And then when we found out you actually owned our house, that you've been this successful businesswoman all along," she shook her head. "It was humiliating. Everything I thought I knew was wrong." "I never intended to humiliate you," I said carefully. "I know that now," she acknowledged. "And I've come to realize something else. We're not so different, you and I. We both care about creating beautiful spaces. We both value craftsmanship and quality. We've just approached it from different perspectives." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table to me. "I've been working with that preservation specialist Michael mentioned. This is our revised renovation plan for the house. We've found ways to honor the historical elements while still updating the functionality for modern family life." I opened the folder, genuinely curious. The plans were impressive, thoughtful, sensitive to the home's character, and far more preservation-minded than I had expected. "These are excellent," I said honestly. Shirley smiled, visibly relieved. I was hoping you'd think so. And I was wondering, would you consider consulting on the project? Not as the property owner, but as someone with expertise in historical renovations? The request took me by surprise. You want my input? I do, she confirmed. You know the house better than anyone, and frankly, your knowledge of period-appropriate techniques would be invaluable. It was a generous offer, an olive branch extended across the battlefield of our previous conflicts, but something in her wording made me pause. And the girls? I asked. Would this arrangement extend to a more respectful relationship in other areas as well? Shirley's expression flickered, revealing a hint of the old calculation. Of course. We're family after all, and families should stick together, support each other. I'm sure you agree that it's best for everyone if we put all this unpleasantness behind us and go back to the way things were, just with a bit more mutual respect. And there it was. The attempted return to familiar patterns, albeit with a thin veneer of newfound appreciation. She wanted access to my expertise, while still maintaining the fundamental power dynamic where she controlled the terms of our relationship. I studied Shirley's face, recognizing the familiar pattern. She was offering a strategic compromise, access to my expertise in exchange for a return to our previous dynamic, just with slightly adjusted boundaries. The old me would have jumped at this peace offering, grateful for any acknowledgement of my value, but I was no longer that woman. The plans are excellent, I said again, closing the folder and sliding it back across the table. And I'm glad you're working with a preservation specialist, but I won't be consulting on the project. Shirley's smile faltered. I don't understand. I thought this was what you wanted, to have input on the renovations, to have your expertise recognized. What I want, I clarified, is to be respected as a whole person, not just for the specific skills that you find useful at any given moment. What I want is a relationship based on genuine mutual regard, not conditional acceptance. That's what I'm offering, Shirley insisted, though her tone had cooled slightly. Is it? I asked mildly. Because it sounds like you're offering to value my expertise when it serves your purposes, while still expecting to define the terms of our relationship. You're suggesting we go back to the way things were, but with a few adjustments that make you more comfortable. Shirley's expression tightened. You're being unfair. I've acknowledged my mistakes. I've made concessions on the renovations. What more do you want from me? I don't want anything from you, I replied, keeping my voice gentle despite the firmness of my words. That's what you're not understanding, Shirley. I'm not negotiating for better treatment or more respect. I'm simply living as my authentic self now, and I get to decide which relationships and projects align with my values. And consulting on your own granddaughter's home doesn't align with your values? There was a hint of the old sharpness in her question. Consulting with someone who genuinely values my input would align perfectly with my values, I corrected. But that's not what you're offering. You're offering a transaction, my expertise in exchange for family harmony on your terms. I took a sip of my coffee, giving her a moment to absorb my words before continuing. I love those girls, and I love my son. I want a positive relationship with all of you. But it has to be authentic, Shirley. It has to be based on who I really, not who you find it convenient for me to be. Shirley stared at me, seeming genuinely baffled by my refusal. I don't understand what you want. I know, I said with genuine compassion. And that's okay. Understanding takes time, but I won't compromise my self-respect to make that process more comfortable for you. I gathered my purse and coat, preparing to leave. The plans are good, Shirley. You don't need my input to move forward with them, and our family relationship will evolve naturally if you allow it to, not through negotiations or transactions, but through genuine acceptance of each other. As I stood, Shirley looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. frustration mixed with something that might have been reluctant respect. "You really have changed," she said quietly. I smiled. "No, I've simply stopped pretending to be less than I am. There's a difference." Walking home through the crisp February afternoon, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. For decades, I had measured my words and actions against how they would be received by others, whether they would upset Michael, disappoint my parents, inconvenience my in-laws, offend Shirley. I had made myself smaller, less visible, less demanding, to maintain harmony. No more. The path ahead might not be smooth. Relationships rarely are when established patterns shift dramatically. But it would be authentic, and that made all the difference. When I reached my house, I found a voicemail from Emma on my phone. "Grandma," my granddaughter's voice said excitedly. "Mom showed me the plans for the house renovations, and I told her they should keep the window seat in my room because that's where you used to read to Dad when he was little. And she said they would. Can I come over this weekend to see more pictures of when Dad was my age? Love you." I smiled as I saved the message. Change was happening, in ways large and small. Not because I had forced it or negotiated for it, but because I had finally given myself permission to be fully present in my own life. And that, I realized, was the greatest renovation of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.